Hello and welcome back to Organizational Leadership 3050 with Dr. James. This is Learning Module 3 of the course Self in Context. As you're looking at the material for this particular learning module, make sure that you are keeping in mind specific ideas out of Kegan and Lahey to begin with. Kegan and Lahey are two scholars who developed a three-plateau or three-phase model for thinking about reflective learning. And as you're looking at this model, keep in mind that in the Organizational Leadership 3050 class, we're focusing on the middle section of this particular diagram, the self-authoring mind. So what you're looking at is the idea that as you have learning experiences over your lifetime, you're slowly developing a technique by which you're able to think reflectively about how these social influences on what you think have affected you. And then you're going to be able to eventually have specific agendas and goals and problem solving that you will be able to engage in on your own, sometimes influenced by that social and environmental context, and sometimes ending up looking at it from the point of view of having to, critique some of that background that you come into the problem with. So first of all, think about the fact that you're going to be working on an assignment tool, an assignment for a paper that you're going to have to attach at the end of this particular learning module. You're going to want to make sure that you are thinking about certain specific questions over the course of this learning module to get that assignment tool paper ready. You should plan on saving it to your computer or to your own jump drive as a Word .doc, .docx, or a .rtf. And you're going to want to make sure that it's in that format so that it can be uploaded and it can be read by your instructor at the other end of the assignment tool. Let's just go ahead and take one more look at the learning outcomes for this particular course and think again about how this is going to end up relating to the models that we're looking at from people like Kegan and Lahey. You're going to be analyzing previous experiences using the conceptual frameworks for reflection. What does that mean in terms of practice? As you're writing up your assignment tools or any discussion assignments, you want to make sure that you are referring back to those frameworks for reflection. Take a look at your own learning experiences and then try to translate them into the different phases within each particular theory that we have looked at from people like Kegan and Lahey. You're going to also want to make sure that you're identifying social influences and community relationships that shape how people react to their experiences. So as you're looking at those situations in the discussion tool, where you end up having specific case studies that you're going to be writing about, think about the different influences and community connections that the person in the particular story will end up reacting to. Remember to document the ethical and theoretical frameworks that are going to influence people's decision making. Make sure that you are considering the question of self-awareness. One of the things that reflective learning seminars like these classes are meant to build is your own self-awareness about how you learn, your own self-awareness about what may be influencing your decision-making. Also, it's going to give you a chance to step back and critique your own value system vis-a-vis or in light of other value systems that you may have confronted, that you may have had experience dealing with over the course of your career or doing volunteer work. So next up, remember that Kegan and Lahey have a three-phase model. The first place we're taking a look at a person who is dealing with their work environment in a socialized way, and then eventually they're going to be able to critique some of those social influences that affect their learning and affect their belief systems. That's becoming self-authoring. And then next up, when we go to Organizational Leadership 4000, you'll be looking at the self-transforming phase of Kegan and Lahey. So remember that there are lots of different diagrams within the learning module content that you'll be able to use as you're writing, as you're doing your assignments and your discussions. Here's one of those particular diagrams that you can use. In Organizational Leadership 3050, we're looking at the middle section of this particular diagram, the self-authoring mind section. So when you're thinking about the idea of somebody having to step back from their social influences, the first thing to do is to become aware of them and be able to document them. So you have to be able to write about, okay, what are the social and community influences that make someone think a certain way? How do you end up acknowledging them? How do you become aware of them? How do you become able to direct yourself in light of those different social influences that we all end up having in our lifetime? Those are the kinds of things that you want to think about in the middle of this diagram. Next up, the three phases, subject and object. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this diagram is that it's showing how Kegan and Lahey are asking us to think about ourself, our own way of thinking, our own personhood, both as a subject and as an object. So if you think about yourself as a subject, it's like you're thinking of yourself as the subject in a sentence, like the I and I think, or I believe, or I feel that. And then you're also thinking about yourself as an object, something that can be studied. So in other words, you're thinking about your own particular mind, your own particular way of looking at the world, as something that you can step back from and analyze and try to become aware of, okay, well, what made it shaped this way? What ended up shaping the beliefs that this person has? What ended up shaping the values that this person has? So it's taking a step back from yourself and doing some self-evaluation as you reflect on your previous learning experiences. So there's a lot that you can learn from going through this process. First up, you'll want to work on your assignment tool for this particular section of the course. Make sure that you're thinking about the questions that you see within this paragraph. First of all, what social interactions, either at work or in volunteer situations or with your family, have shaped your beliefs? When your beliefs have changed, why did this happen? When you look back on your learning experiences, have your friends or your community helped or hindered your understanding of the world? And keep in mind that part of the process of thinking critically about these questions isn't that you're necessarily trying to always be positive or negative. You're trying to just do honest reporting of what went into your prior experiences. Do you have any regrets about how you connected or didn't connect with social networks? Do you think that you've in some ways been limited by your ability to connect up with different kinds of people with different backgrounds? Would that be something that would help you? Is that something that you'd like to work on? Describe an example of someone who you consider to interact ideally with others. So an ideal example, somebody who you think is like a really good example to follow. How close are you to living up to that example? How would you end up thinking about how to try and refine how you interact with the world around you so that you end up having, a better interaction with other people? And keep in mind as you're answering this question, you want it to be a real world example. So that's why there's a note in this assignment that says, try not to think about some of the classic examples that people would use of somebody who they admire in general. Like a lot of people will say, oh, I love my mom. My mom's such a wonderful person. She's always been so kind to others. That's great, but it's not exactly the kind of work or volunteer experience that we're thinking of. Same thing with an example like Jesus. Fantastic example in a lot of different ways. But what we're looking for here is somebody who you could point to as, well, I saw them when they had to interact with someone when they were working at company X, and they handled this really well. You want to be a real-world example of like a real company or a real volunteer issue. Next up, make sure that you're thinking still about those posting and responses that you've had to work on. There's 3 different ones for Organizational Leadership 3050 that you're going to want to work on. First of all, consider yourself as a member of a team, as a volunteer. What did you do in interacting with others that went well? What did you do in terms of interacting with others that did not go well? Or did it have an effect that you did not expect? Did people not understand your intentions? Maybe you intended to do something really well and people ended up being confused by it or didn't understand what you meant to do. In those kinds of situations, how can you look back at that as a learning experience? How can you reflect on it as a learning experience for your reflective seminar class? Here's another example. This is a case study, so it's not so much about you, but it's still an example that you could learn from. This is an example made up about a man named John Reynolds, who is a research chemist in Alabama. He is doing a lot of wonderful work with Habitat for Humanity, and it's a wonderful organization. He loves doing this work, and he's excited about it. There's a lot of different ways in which it benefits him in terms of his career. He gets to meet lots of good people, have good social interactions, and he's also getting points towards his tenure promotion, his community service points for his job. Then he ends up finding out that there's the potential that polyvinyl chloride, which is used in the making of siding for homes, may end up having some negative effects in the environment. So what this problem is asking you to deal with is, okay, well, how would you think about this if you were John Reynolds? How would you handle it? Do you end up having to make a decision about whether you're going to speak with someone in the organization about it? Are you going to have to do more research about it? What are the kinds of interactions that you see John Reynolds having to have if he's going to take this particular problem and try to deal with it head on? And how do you do that in a way that's positive? So there's a lot to think about in that particular case example. Just keep in mind it's all about the social interactions that he's going to have and how he can handle it. Here's the third of the 3 discussions in posting and response. This is another case study, and this is a historically accurate case study, but the names of the individuals involved are made up. This is about the late 1950s and nuclear testing that was going on in a place called the Marshall Islands. And this is an actual thing that really did happen. They needed to find places where they could test new nuclear weaponry for the military. And it did turn out that there were a number of people who ended up having cancer because of the radiation that was released. So this is another example of somebody who's dealing with this particular kind of a situation. He has a friend who's a doctor who's noticed that there has been this medical effect because of the testing. So when you're looking at this case, think about the kinds of interaction that the person involved will end up having to have. If you were in their position, how would you end up trying to deal with this kind of a situation? Who would you discuss it with? How could you try to approach it in a way that would be positive? What kinds of social interactions will this person have to deal with? So remember that you have the assignment tool that's going to be due at the end of week 4, and you're also continuing to work in those discussion tool items and posting and response from week 3. You want to make sure that you're thinking about these particular social interactions in a careful way, and that you're preparing your work so that it's going to make some good sense for the rest of the class. Thanks again, and take care. Bye-bye.